Hey guys, we're back with our round two analysis, and good round. Eugene won,
Yep.
and I drew with 2600 GM Emre Can from Turkey.
Great job.
So it was, that was an interesting game, but let's start with your game.
Sure. So I was playing another German master. He's 2300, and I'm white. So I played knight f3 to change things up. I can play pretty much any move these days: e4, d4, c4. And if you want to learn more about the openings, you can check out my website, chessopeningsexplained.com. But in this game, my opponent reacted kind of symmetrical: knight f6, g3, g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, and I played c4. So, you know, still it's unclear which opening we're going to get. He can play c5 for symmetrical kind of English. He can play d5, which is more like Grunfeld style, kind of aggressive approach. Or he can just castle in d6, King's Indian.
Is there a reason why play c4 instead of d4?
Yeah, so here I have a extra option. So if he plays d5 and I play takes, for instance, here, there's knight b6, and I can play this h4. It's getting kind of popular.
Oh, and you put the pawn on d3.
Yeah, and the pawn goes on d3. So it's kind of an interesting approach. At least I was entertaining this idea. I think there was a game, Giri, Aronian against Giri, that Aronian won. Quite a nice game with a checkmate and attack. But he plays very symmetrical. The idea is to mid d4 with d5, and now this is sort of the rock-solid Grunfeld.
Yeah.
The idea is that if I take on d5, we have perfect symmetry, and it's going to be quite difficult for white to gain an advantage. So to change things up, I played queen b3, and now the more theoretical move is knight c3. And after rook d8, there's an interesting move, bishop d2, which was played by Wesley So and I think a couple other strong players. I think Richard Rapport, who's playing in this tournament. And this is kind of a new idea. Position is really complex. You know, still a lot of kind of room for analysis. Yeah. But I played something totally new, guys. Probably novelty of the bat. This move, bishop d2. And the idea is that, again, the bishop may be useful on this, you know, b4 square or even a5 square in the future. And I'm not sure where the knight belongs. I can go to a3, c3, and I'm kind of waiting. Obviously, the most testing line is to take the pawn. My opponent somehow dismissed this. Maybe he thought this is my preparation. But this is the most testing line. And here, I was going to try knight c3, and bishop f5, I think, is forced. And here I have a lot of cool ideas, including this move a4. Even this move bishop c1 with the idea to sacrifice two rooks for the queen, and bishop a3.
So this is the only place where the queen gets trapped, huh? Bishop
right.
c1.
This is the only line. Although he can play queen b6 with a double-edged position. So there's lots of room kind of for creativity for both sides, but I am down a pawn, and this is the most principled approach. But black also is risking to get the queen trapped. So he played kind of solid bishop e6 and bishop f5. And now I play queen b3 because at this point I didn't quite mind this endgame, because once again the pawn can go to b4, this pawn on a7 is weak, and my knight can go to a3, c4, and a5. And that's a very nice outpost for the knight.
Yeah.
So he again didn't want to trade queens. He plays knight a6, but after queen a3, notice this bishop a5 idea followed by knight c3 is really annoying.
Yeah.
So he didn't want to bother with that. He played somewhat passive move queen d8, and now I just got a normal position. Knight e4, bishop f4. My queen is actually well placed. His queen went to b6 and d8. Unclear with the queen, why the queen wasted so many tempi. And in these positions, it's very difficult to find good square for white's queen, because I want to put the rooks on probably d1 and c1, and it's actually an ideal square. It cannot be attacked. It's keeping an eye on the a7 and e7 pawns, and I think white is a little bit better. And
it kind of works against black playing c5.
Right, c5 is going to be quite hard to get here. So he goes knight c7 with an obvious idea, knight d5, again to try to get that symmetrical structure, but I'm just in time to play this move, knight h4. So knight on e4 is hit, so he has to go for this position. The bishop is under attack, and now after e4, I think white gains a pretty nice advantage.
Yeah.
I think the only tactical kind of justification for his play was this funny looking move c5, and if I take, he has this fork, which is unpleasant.
Oh.
So if I don't take and I play d5, the knight's coming over here. So I think I just have to take on c7 and just be satisfied with a nice center, but he does get the bishop here.
Yeah, it seems like reasonable Grunfeld.
Yeah, normal Grunfeld position, nothing special. He plays bishop e2, transfers the bishop to a6, but it's a little too slow because now after this, knight b5, simply queen b3. He's actually got major problems. He cannot play for a c5 or e5. If he plays c5, I guess I can just play immediately a4 here.
A4 looks good.
And all of a sudden this knight finds himself quite lost there. So he played the more logical move, queen a5, trying to connect the rooks and hit the pawn. And after rook c1, rook d8, I found this move knight d2. I could have also played immediate e5 to kind of lock that bishop up, but I started with knight d2. He played queen a3, and now I played d5. So I think white is just better here.
Yeah, you're just gaining so much space.
And again, the problem is it's very difficult to get c5 going. This bishop is dead. The bishop on a6 doesn't do much. And the knight could easily get hit with either c4 or a4 in the future. So I just have a very solid center. And now I started playing Carlsen style. Can you guess my next move after b6?
Okay, well I know the move, but if you guys want to pause the video and guess. And you got a big hint, because Carlsen really loves making this kind of move when he has this
what would Carlsen play here?
Strategic edge. Okay, well, let's keep going.
So the move is h4.
Yeah.
And now there is...
it's funny, people think this is like an attacking move, but it's usually just positional.
Just a positional squeeze. It's aimed at kind of idea to play h5 or even h6. And notice that the knight has a very nice anchor on g5 as well in these positions. And also the king gets a loft, which is a nice, especially back rank problems. And the bishop can go to h3 sometimes as well. So this is just an overall useful move, kind of indicating to my opponent, what are you going to do next?
Yeah.
I think c5 is running into all kind of problems. I can just play d5, for instance.
Yeah, d5 looks good.
And this is just domination.
Well, it's like your game from Isle of Man, right? Remember you had the
exactly,
huge pawns?
The huge pawns. So he took, which is somewhat of a concession, but he didn't know what else to do. Now I play b4 to stop any a5, c5 counterplay. h6, bishop e3. Now my idea is to keep gaining more space with c4. Oops, let me go back. So yeah, c4 is my threat. So he has to do something about it. That's why he plays rook to d8. Now I play rook fd1, renewing my threat. And after f6, I just take over the center.
Yeah, I mean, this is how you really restrict the bishop, right? You put your pawns in the same color.
Yep.
So the bishop has no squares.
And now he's basically completely paralyzed. Yeah. So he tries to get some counterplay, which understandably for, he's looking for some oxygen here.
Right.
And here was an interesting moment. We were approaching time pressure, and I saw the move rook takes d8, rook takes d8, rook a1. But I wanted to gain the move and get exactly the same position. So what did I play here? I played rook a1, knowing what he's going to do next. And then back to it. So I gained one move.
Oh, right, yeah.
So this is a funny way to gain a move. So he plays rook a8, and now I just dominate with a very simple idea. Knight c3. Notice that b5 is really annoying. He tries to get counterplay, but it's a little too late. b5 only moves knight d8, otherwise he's completely busted. And now I liked what I did here. I simply played knight e4. And after pawn takes, here he collapsed. He just plays c5. I thought his best try is just to take on b5. And maybe he can hold this position. I even was thinking during the game he may try this a6 and just give up the pawn and just play 1 against 2.
Oh, but try to hold this.
And try to hold that. Because there are a lot of end games where, I may get a bishop and knight against knight with no pawns. It's a draw.
Right.
So it's just not enough winning material. But it is, I'm the only one present here.
Yeah, still a tough defense because you're just going to take your time.
Yeah, I'm going to take my time. He's going to play something like this. I'm just going to drop back, protect all my pawns, activate the bishop, the knight, and the king. And also this guy can't get activated. That's his main problem.
Okay.
So maybe he play bishop h6. That's his only try.
Would there be any trades you'd want to make?
Well, I think I want to avoid trades in general here. And I want to keep my bishops. I think that's the most important thing. Just keep as many pieces as possible.
So you actually just don't want to trade at all?
No. Because with every trade, I think the drawing chances increase. Because he's actually lacking squares for his pieces.
Right.
So I thought that was a good practical choice. But he plays c5. And once again, on move 41, I don't know what's going on with my opponents. They just blunder horribly. My previous opponent blundered move 41.
Right.
My opponent plays a6. Can you guys find the tactic that immediately refutes this move.
Okay, white to play and win. Be accurate.
Alright, so this is actually quite easy tactic. You just have to calculate all the forcing moves. After pawn takes, notice that the rook is overloaded because the knight's going to be under attack. And after that, look at the bishop. Simple discovered check, and he resigned. So that was the game.
Nice. All right, thanks, Eugene.
Sure. All right, guys, I'm gonna go rest up for the get ready for the second game of the day. Kostya's gonna take over.
All right, thanks. All right, guys. So as mentioned before, I drew with a pretty strong player here, Emre Can from Turkey, and he played the Rogozin, which I was kind of expecting, along with the King's Indian. And I went for this new line with c takes d5, e takes d5, and bishop f4. So this line has been played by Svidler recently against the Rogozin, because the lines with bishop g5 are just simply very theoretical and pretty good for black. So bishop f4, knight e4, rook c1, knight c6, and yeah, white's idea here is just to kind of support the knight with the rook, but here I forgot my prep. So the main move apparently is knight d2, which I was looking at last night, but I just couldn't remember it during the game. Actually, I wasn't even sure if I had this position in my prep, so I completely forgot it. I started thinking a little bit, and eventually I figured out, well, I have to develop, and g3 seems like a pretty useful move. If you've never seen this line before, black is often playing g5, actually, just supported by the knight on e4, and then the idea is that if the bishop goes back here, black will also have h5. And then I can't move my h-pawn because he takes on g3 and ruins my pawns, but otherwise black threatens h4 and white's in really bad shape. So that's why white can't really just play e3 in this position. I think it's probably just a big mistake after this and this, and even if bishop e5 he can throw in f6. But okay, if you guys want to learn a bit more detail about this line, I looked up the theory after the game, analyzed it a bit, and I'm going to have the PGN file on my Patreon page, so I'll have the link for that in the description below, and you can check that out if you want a little bit more opening analysis, a little bit more detail on this line. So g3 is not great, but it's okay. It's definitely a playable move. Now you play bishop f5, which I think I was expecting, and it's an annoying move because he's starting to take on c3. I would have to take with the pawn, and then bishop a3, and my rook ends up trapped. So bishop g2, I would lose the exchange in this way, and I have to figure out something to do. I thought about queen to b3 here, but it runs into a5. And there was actually a game like this where John Ligwood-Hammer beat someone 2500 with black very, very easily. And now black is just starting a4, and I think white just doesn't have enough squares for the queen here. Eventually I came up with bishop d2, which I think, given the situation, is probably the best move here. The point is that I'm just supporting the knight on c3, so if he takes, I take with the bishop. And if he takes my bishop on d2, well, then I take with the queen. And I've given up the two bishops, but I did get him to put his knight on c6, which is kind of not really ideal. And then next move I'm going to play a3, and then either he gives up the bishop, or he has to go back, and then my rook is on the c-file. Bishop goes to g2. I think white's position definitely makes sense. So I think things should be more or less equal here, but he definitely outplays me in a couple of moves. So castles, bishop g2, rook e8, castles. Finally he trades, and he plays 97. I thought this was maybe not the most challenging, because after a3 he's forced to give back the bishop pair. Because if he goes bishop d6, I have knight b5 if I want, although it's not necessary. And if he goes bishop a5, then I go b4, knight a4, and then either I trade, or more likely I just put the knight on c5, and that knight is really strong. But 97 is actually, I realized a few moves later, a very serious idea, because he's going to just put the pawn on c6, and then reroute the knight to d6, and he gets a very comfortable QGD type position. We're basically getting Carlsbad structure. Well, okay, I played a3, he takes. And I think this is probably the only move I really regret in this game. I ended up taking with the queen, but I really wanted to take with the pawn here, and I think I should have. The idea of taking with the pawn is now I can push c4, and I can use my bishop on this diagonal, the Catalan bishop. In the game, as you guys will see, black put the pawn on c6, and this bishop was just a terrible piece, and it was just biting on granite on this pawn chain. But if I get c4 in, then I have a lot more bite in the position, and I think white is definitely not worse, and maybe even pushing a little bit. I ended up deciding against it just because it looks weird, to be honest. I mean, my rook is on the c-file. I should keep the c-file open, right? Or so I thought. But given the chance, I would really want to play this position again with b takes c3, because I think white just gets a very easy game. Just push c4, knight e5, and all the pieces are working. And the rook gets to work on the c-file as well. Okay, but I took queen takes, c6 was played. Now I just couldn't find the right plan here for white. Because the problem is, if I play a move like b4, kind of typical minority attack, black is in time. Knight c8, he hits the pawn on e2, so maybe I play e3, he plays knight d6, and I'm very, very far from achieving a4 and b5, right? a4, he can just play a6, or even put the knight on c4. And black is just more comfortable here. He can play bishop e4, he can play knight c4, he can even put the pawn on b5 once his knight on c4, because I'm never going to get to that pawn on c6. And the bishop on g2 just doesn't make any sense here. I'd much rather be on e2. So I started realizing here that things are kind of going wrong. And I was just trying to look for some kind of, let's say, active possibility. So I played rook fe1, knight c8, knight e5, knight d6. And I was really toying with the idea of playing f3 here, right? So I can go for e4. And I mean, this is one of white's main plans in the position, and it makes a lot of sense with the bishop on g2. The problem is after f6, I think I'm just not going to be able to play e4. Like knight d3, he can play rook e3, he can play knight b5. I mean, black has a lot of moves here, and e4 is currently under control. I mean, just too many pieces on this square. Even a move like queen e7. And I think white doesn't have a good position at all. So I changed my mind. I didn't play f3. I played queen b3 instead, which I'm not sure, but the idea is to just kind of be annoying. And I'm x-raying the f7 pawn. So now maybe I have some e4 motives where f7 ends up hanging. I'm hitting the b7 pawn, of course, and I'm getting out of the way of any tempos with knight b5 or knight to e4. For example, I really was thinking about playing the move knight to d3 here, but then after knight b5, it's annoying to kind of face. Queen b3, and then I think black played a really strong move, queen b6. Actually, same idea as in Eugene's game, because he wants to trade queens and open the a-file for his rook. And now I don't really have a choice. I thought about queen b4, but I think my pawns will just end up weak, and I don't think I can really go for this. Black will play f6, I'll have to move my knight, and then black will play knight c4, and just kind of take over. Even a5 here, just opening up the rook, and again my bishop is misplaced. So if the queen side opens up and my bishop is on g2, I'm just going to lose on that side of the board. So unfortunately I had to take on b6, although I really didn't want to, but there's not much else to do because the d4 pawn is hanging and knight b5 is coming. So I trade. And here, okay, I figured I have to start taking some measures because black wants to play f6, and then I'll move my knight, and then he wants to play knight c4, and it's actually very difficult for me to defend the b2 pawn because I don't have rook c2, I don't have rook b1. So I played g4. I think this is kind of an important move to kick the bishop off of f5. He went back, h3, f6, and knight d3. Now he plays bishop f7. And at this point I think it's pretty clear that black is pushing for an advantage here because white just has 0 targets. The bishop on g2 is dead, the rooks aren't working, but black has very standard and straightforward ideas. Knight c4, bishop g6, even h5 at some point, just put more pressure on white's position. So I felt like I was under real pressure here, but I knew that objectively I'm probably not lost. So as long as I try not to create any new weaknesses and just look for any chances I can get, I should have chances to hold the game. And eventually I did. So quite happy with how things turned out. Okay, he played knight c4, rook e2, just defending the pawn. Now bishop g6, I can just play knight f4 and h5. Definitely an annoying move, because if I play something like knight f4, for example, he can take on g4, play g5, and then either the knight goes back and I get hit again with bishop g6, or I play knight h5, trade, king g7, or maybe f5 to make sure I don't play e4. And I wasn't sure about this position. I just feel like the knight is really dominating my bishop here. And black can put the king on h6, the rooks can double on the e-file, break with f4 somewhere. I think black just has strategically, much better position. Just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and white just has zero counterplay. So of course I wanted to avoid that kind of situation. I kept the knight on the board. Bishop f3, takes, g5, and knight b4. So I was really trying to get e4 in this position, but it tactically is just not working. In a lot of cases, even if I can't play e4 and we trade these pawns, I'm just left with a weakness on d4 because of the IQP. So I played knight b4, and this knight is not really attacking anything, but I am putting some latent pressure on c6 and on d5. So black can't ever play c5, not that he would really want to. But if I get e4 in, now e4 comes with a little bit more bite. Lastly, I am threatening potential sacrifices, which we'll see in the game actually did take place. Okay, king g7, which I think is a very good prophylactic move. If bishop g6 is just a blunder because knight takes d5. And knight on c4 ends up hanging. Bishop f7, we trade, rook c4, and I won a bunch of pawns. So right away, clearly this knight on b4, it's not threatening anything, but it does make things somewhat uncomfortable for black because he has to always keep these tactics in mind. But I figured he's never going to let me achieve any kind of nice sacrifice because, well, it's a pretty obvious idea in the position. He's going to have it under control. So king g7, king g2, we're both kind of improving our position, except I think black has more to do than white. He moves the knight to d6. I move the rook back. Rook a e8 and king g2. Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to do, so I'm just sitting put. b2 can be defended. I don't have any other real weaknesses. And so my idea here is just don't do anything and see what he comes up with. So I played here. Now he plays bishop g6. And in this case, I can really strongly consider taking on c6. And I get two pawns. I'm hitting the knight, I'm hitting b6, and I'm hitting d5. But the problem is after knight to e4, I can take a third pawn, rook takes b6. But see if you guys can find the best move for black here. I think there's one very clear idea. And I haven't checked this with the engine, I could be wrong, but I think if black just plays rook c7 or rook to c8 and takes over the c-file, then white just doesn't get enough for the piece. I get three pawns, but these pawns are not going to be very strong. And I think black's pieces just get immediate counterplay. f2 is weak, and I think my king is going to come under serious fire. So I definitely tried to make that sacrifice work. I was looking for it in a lot of positions, but I was never really getting enough. Okay, so I played bishop e2, and I think this is a useful move because I'm just trying to improve this bishop. Bishop e4 check. Now I have to be careful not to play f3 because of course he backs up and suddenly e3 it can't be defended, right? Pawns don't move backwards. So I play king g3. He plays rook h8. And now I realize I really have to do something because I'm in danger of losing the game very quickly. I think now at this point black is definitely threatening f5. And if takes, knight comes in with check. And the king is just kind of getting into a mating net here, right? I have to come up, king to g4. Then black plays king to f6, and rook h4 is going to be mate next move. So I realize things here are getting very, very dangerous. I was thinking about playing f3 here. But black will, let's say, back up, bishop g6. Now f2 is, or e3 is hanging. I have to play something like bishop to d3. And even a move like takes, and knight c4. And I have a very difficult time protecting this pawn. If king f2 He can back it up with rook a8. Maybe I can play e4 here. I'm not really sure about this one. But he also has moves like f5. And the king side opens up, but my knight on b4 is very, very far, and is just going to be, this is going to be very tough defense, because now e3 is weak, f3 is weak, and he's going to have some threats against the king. So I felt like this was going to be very uncomfortable. I looked to sacrifice again with knight takes c6, and here I realized actually it does have some potential, because his bishop is on e4, kind of blocking this square from his knight. So I ended up taking it, and I'll show you guys kind of what I calculated here. And my main idea is, okay, I'm getting 2 pawns. If I can get a third pawn and prevent him from getting counterplay, well, then my pawns start rolling, and then all 3 results are possible. I also have the idea of just playing f3 at some point to take over the e4 square. The bishop will have to move, and then I can play like king f2 and defend the e3 pawn, and hopefully keep everything under control. So from white's point of view, it's really all about being able to control the position, not really allow black to have any real threats here, and just try to get the pawns moving. Well, he played knight c4, which I think was a mistake. I thought rook e6 was a clever defense, threatening knight f5 check. So if I take on b6, knight f5, and he wins the rook. And my idea was to play rook ec1, and maybe this is what he didn't like either. Because I keep this pin, and the rook is protected, so knight f5 is not possible. And I don't have the third pawn yet, I only have 2 pawns, but I do have a lot of ideas. I can give check on the 7th rank, and he doesn't have such a comfortable defense, because if the king ever comes up to g6, then f3, and the bishop on e4 is trapped. So white definitely has some ideas here. This f3 is kind of an annoying resource. He played knight c4, and I think he was expecting me to take. And he definitely gets a lot of chances here because his bishop on e4 is really strong, and my pawns aren't super mobile. Maybe he can even play f5 here and immediately get play. But instead of taking, I started with f3. And this is a lot stronger because his bishop can no longer stay on the diagonal. He went back, bishop g6. Now I take on c4. And I took this pawn. And at this point I felt like white is no longer worse because I have 3 pawns for the piece, and I just have very easy and very mobile pawns as well. I can play e4 and d5 very quickly. I can try to bring my king over to d4. I can gang up on the b6 pawn. I felt like actually white is playing for 2 results here. But let's see how things turned out. He played bishop f7, rook c6, b5, and e4. I don't think I quite played it the best way because I allowed him to play this move b4. And this was a really strong defensive idea. Now a lot of files are opening up, and his rooks are going to be able to get into my position and create counterplay. So that's exactly what happened. Rook c1, he traded on a3, rook a8, and now he simply wants to take the pawn and then come into my position or double on the 3rd rank. But I think white here has enough to basically make a draw, and I realize probably I'm not playing for the win anymore. I should be careful not to lose and be solid. So I played rook c3 and rook a7. Now he's winning the a3 pawn for sure. And I think white has a few ways of making a draw here. I think e5 was definitely good enough, just exchanging off all the pawns. Let's say he takes on a3. I'll play f4. And all the pawns are traded, and white can make an easy draw because I'm not going to have to defend rook and bishop versus rook. That would be kind of a nightmare. I can even just put my king on g5, keep my rook active, and it'll be very hard for black to make any kind of progress here because the pawns, they can protect some important squares. Maybe he would try and kind of look for a way to press, but I think that should be pretty easily drawn. In any case, I wanted to look for maybe a more active idea, so I chose rook to b6. I figured I'm pretty comfortable here. Rook takes a3, and rook c6 is the idea. Now I want to take the f6 pawn, and then play rook f5 and take the g5 pawn. So black here, I think, only has one way of creating enough counterplay to kind of keep the draw. Because if he goes for something like, let's say, rook a2 and rook h8, which looks very scary at first because he wants to come down here and then give mate on g2, but white isn't time to play rook f5. Let's say this rook, take on g5 with check, and then the king easily gets out, and white wins very easily here with 4 connected passers. But he was quite accurate, of course. This guy's 2600, so he's not going to miss a simple draw. So rook a1, rook takes f6, and his idea is rook 8 a2. Now this rook is covering the second rank, and he can give perpetual with the other rook. Rook to g1 check, followed by rook h1. White also has to be precise, so I played rook f5. Now if he tries to set up any mating net, he's not in time, because I take the pawn to the check, and the king again gets out. But he played rook g1 check, offered a draw. Of course, we're just going to repeat moves anyway, and that was that. So I'm on 1.5 out of 2. Our next round is starting in like 90 minutes, and we'll be back with more videos later on. Take care, guys.